Need for Speed is one of the oldest racing game series that has delighted more than one generation of gamers. Just think about it, the first part was released 30 years ago. Over the years, the series has experienced its ups and downs, and we gamers have been witnesses to this exhilarating ride. You can feel any way you want about the NFS series, but it's hard to deny its immense contribution to the gaming industry, especially in racing simulators. In its heyday, the thrill of speed set entire trends. Just remember the legendary Underground series. While this iconic racing franchise used to delight fans with nearly every new release, it's now experiencing some tough times. That's exactly what we will talk about today. We're going to explore how the Need for Speed series is declining. Buckle up, there are no stops ahead. A quick note, the Need for Speed series includes around 25 full games, not counting various versions for portable consoles. To keep things concise, we will focus on the most significant projects in the franchise. Let's start with a quick ride through the classics. Need for Speed 3 Hot Pursuit, released in '98, was groundbreaking for the series. It introduced police chases that fundamentally changed the gameplay, allowing players to take on the role of both the lawbreaker and the law enforcer. The game also featured a split-screen mode, enabling two players to race on the same computer. The driving mechanics were balanced, preventing the game from becoming either an arcade nightmare or a meticulous simulator. And this was no surprise. The weak sales of the second NFS prompted developers to rethink their approach. And as we've seen, this decision benefited the game greatly. Tuning, if you can call it that, also was present in the game. It wasn't groundbreaking, but players could paint their cars, and a major plus was the ability to view detailed information about each vehicle, including its specifications and features. Critics and players were very satisfied with the third part, giving it a score of 8.6 out of 10. The game was a commercial success. Jumping ahead to 2003, we arrive at the iconic Underground. By that time, sales of previous titles were steadily declining, and players' interest in NFS was decreasing with each new release. The studio urgently needed to reinvent the Need for Speed concept and breathe new life into it. The Fast and Furious movie significantly influenced this, establishing a new trend for street racing. In Underground, it wasn't enough just to cross the finish line first. Style became essential. The tuning system was completely overhauled, allowing players to transform a plain grey sedan into a stunning car that not only left competitors behind, but dazzled them with its beauty. Style became a fundamental aspect of the game. Players earned style points for successfully executed tricks like drifting or jumping, and reaching a maximum would reward them with the new tuning parts. Additionally, players could earn money by participating in races, which could be spent on new cars and upgrades. The main criticism focused on the repetitive tracks that players had to race on repeatedly, as well as the opponent's eye, which was often labeled as cheating. Many pre-release reviewers warned players that to win races, they would have to navigate the same repetitive tracks multiple times. However, for the most part, both critics and gamers were thrilled with the game, awarding it a score of 8.3 out of 10. The 7 million copies sold prompted Electronic Arts to push the black box development studio to quickly release a sequel, which didn't take long to arrive. However, Underground 2 didn't offer anything groundbreaking. Its main feature was an open world which freed gamers from linear races, and the Night City no longer constrained vehicle movement. Naturally, the car roster was updated, adding SUVs with heavier handling. The graphics were slightly improved, and the new sound design was excellent. The gameplay didn't undergo significant changes. The driving mechanics still favored an arcade style than a serious simulator, and amusingly, cops were still absent, which disappointed fans. However, the sequel was rated even better at 8.6 out of 10, but its sales were half that of the original. For the studio, this meant only one thing: out with sequels and in with fresh ideas. And damn, they really didn't mess up. Need for Speed Most Wanted, released in 2005, is still regarded by many as the best entry in the franchise.
Hi, I'm Josie Marin, and I play Mia in Need for Speed Most Wanted. Make sure you do all your racing in the game.
So, what's the secret to its success? Let's break it down, starting with the main attraction, the car lineup. Most Wanted offered players around 31 different cars from various brands: Mercedes, Ford, BMW.
It's BMW, not BMW, Bayerische Motorenwerke.
Lamborghini, Porsche, and many more. For the first time in the series, it also featured cars like Cadillac CTS and Fiat Punto, shifting the focus from standard vehicles to sports cars. Next up is tuning. Even though some features from Underground were inexplicably cut, like neon underglow, customization or painting specific body parts, tuning in Most Wanted remained engaging. Players could still change body parts, choose rims to their liking, add spoilers of different sizes, and of course paint their cars however they wanted. Once you sorted out the car's appearance, you can improve its performance by purchasing expensive parts like engines, turbochargers, transmissions, brakes, tires, suspension, and of course, nitrous oxide. Tuning is great, but how did the cars handle back in 2005? They felt different compared to Underground. Cars were easier to drift, and it often took some skill to avoid flying off the track during sharp turns, especially if your time slowing meter was at 0. This new feature introduced a casual element to the game, making speed feel more thrilling. The difference between 100 and 200 miles per hour made players truly pay attention to the road to avoid missing another sharp turn. While Most Wanted didn't offer anything groundbreaking in terms of handling, it didn't aim to. Despite its casual approach, it excelled at entertaining players with a challenge they could tackle if they tried. Just think about that final race on the blacklist and the police chase that followed. Speaking of police, they were a constant obstacle in nearly every race. While that could be frustrating at times, it brought a refreshing variety to the gameplay. The city was filled with traps, whether it was a billboard, a gas station, or even a giant donut. Each of these objects could become deadly for local law enforcement, and it always looked spectacular. If you didn't feel like looking for traps, you could always crash head-on into a police cruiser, leaving it crumpled. And perhaps the last thing people usually pay attention to in racing games is the story. But even here, Most Wanted didn't fall flat. The plot isn't Oscar-worthy, but its presentation was incredible, especially in 2005. It felt like you were watching a movie about street racers always evading the cops, hello Fast and Furious, with all the cutscenes shot from a first-person perspective, enhancing the immersion. The voice acting also deserves praise. Almost every character had a distinct personality, and the main heroine stole my heart.
Get in.
But you know what would make racing at breakneck speed while escaping the cops even cooler?
Listen.
That's right, an amazing soundtrack that rocked every player's speakers. In short, I think we've all been reminded once again why Most Wanted is considered one of the best, if not the best, entries in the franchise, and the iconic BMW M3 GTR will continue to captivate fans for a long time. Critics and players welcomed the game warmly, with an average score of 8.7 out of 10 on Metacritic. By 2009, around 16 million copies of the game were sold, making Most Wanted the best-selling game in the series. In 2006, a new title called Carbon was released, serving as a direct continuation of Most Wanted, and you will realize this as soon as you start the game. This time the action takes place in a different city, and the overcast day has been replaced by deep night. One of the main distinguishing features is the police. They are now less eager to race the protagonist, with a greater focus on racing and naturally on tuning, which was even more refined than in Most Wanted. Players could also create their own crew by hiring various racers and participate with them in most racing events. Each racer in the crew had a specific role. Scouts found shortcuts for the player, while blockers hindered opponents by slowing them down. There was also a significant emphasis on drifting, which wasn't featured in the previous title, as a considerable part of the gameplay revolved around it. For the drift enthusiasts, a new mode was introduced where players had to drift in tight canyons to earn points for victory. Gamers and critics received Carbon very well, giving it a score of 7.4 out of 10. However, some negatives were noted, surprisingly, regarding the police chases and boss races. Now let's jump to 2007, where we have NFS ProStreet, which, in my opinion, really shouldn't have seen the light of day. But let's start with the positives. The car tuning here is more realistic. Simple changes to body parts like bumpers and spoilers affected the car's aerodynamics, impacting its performance and handling on the track. This is a damn cool innovation even for a casual gamer like me. Additionally, internal car components like the engine, suspension and transmission needed to be tuned for specific type of races to achieve the best results. This required some effort, but also provided a deeper immersion into the game. On top of that, vehicle damage finally became more than just cosmetic. With critical damage, a car could stall and fail to start again. And here the most offensive thing happens. All of these significant advantages are shattered by the concept of the game itself. In the years leading up to ProStreet, the series had firmly established itself in the realm of street racing, and players had made it clear that this was what they wanted. Of course, you can't rely on the same features forever, and the modest sales of NFS Carbon prove that. But making such a radical and sudden shift in the concept with ProStreet was a losing proposition from the start. Yes, the handling became more realistic and tuning was more believable, but you can't cover up the complete lack of street racing. Moreover, there are simply no free races in ProStreet. Racing lap after lap on similar tracks, without the option to explore an open environment, was unbearably boring. The project ended up feeling fresh, but very ambiguous, resulting in disappointing ratings from players, with a score of 6.4 out of 10 on Metacritic. Let's skip the complete failure of Undercover and move straight to another attempt at adding realism, NFS Shift, and surprisingly, this time it worked out decently. To give a preview, the game was well received, scoring 83 on Metacritic, though critic scores different from players, who rated it 5.8 out of 10. However, compared to Undercover, this was already a success, and the explanation is quite simple. Fans still had a bad taste left from the previous title, while Shift continued to develop the concept of professional racing, correcting the mistakes of its predecessor. The tracks became more diverse, featuring both Grand Prix circuits and handcrafted routes. The tuning system was also refined, allowing for even more detailed and precise adjustments, which meant the car behavior was more realistic than before. Notably, there was a first-person view from the cockpit, which hadn't been seen since NFS Porsche in 2000. A year later, there came either a remake or reboot of '98 title NFS Hot Pursuit. Over time, the developers managed to bring the series back to its roots. Once again, there was a large city covering 160 square kilometers, while the map in Burnout Paradise 2008 was 4 times smaller. Players could freely navigate the vast location until they encountered the police. Yeah, the game reintroduced the crazy police chases with a focus on top-tier sports cars. Just like in the '98 version, players could choose to play as either cops or racers, and each side had its own career mode. The types of races largely mirrored the original, such as pursuits, where players had to be the first to reach the finish line without getting caught by the police, while the police had to ensure the racer didn't cross the finish line. However, new modes were introduced like interception, where players in the role of police had to catch a racer within a set time. The physics of the cars returned to a more casual feel, and while critics accepted this, awarding the game a score of 86 out of 100, players rated it only 6.9 out of 10. Skipping over the fairly neutral sequel Shift, let's move on to a more one-sided project, The Run. Despite the fact that the game conceptually ventured into a different dimension, I managed to find a sort of enjoyment in it back in the day. It's an entirely corridor-style arcade racer with a focus on the story, featuring action elements and quick time events. I completed it relatively easily in a couple of days, and wouldn't ever consider replaying it in my right mind. The game rightfully received low scores, around 69 out of 100 from critics and 6.2 out of 10 from players, cause The Run feels more like a story-driven standalone expansion to a main game rather than a fully fledged project. But while The Run at least attempted to offer an original story, the project released in 2012, which inexplicably carried the name Most Wanted, is an absolute slap in the face to fans. I vividly remember my first encounter with this game. It's hard to forget. It was given away for free on Origin, and I simply couldn't overlook this imposter. My first thought after 10 minutes of playing the new Most Wanted was, how dare they call it that? Giving this name to the new NFS was the biggest mistake by Electronic Arts. They hoped to attract as many players as possible with this name, but once players realized they'd been misled, they were furious and hated both EA and the game itself. The 2012 Most Wanted can't even be unequivocally labeled a bad game. It had decent graphics, passable car handling, and an open world. However, the name completely overshadowed any of its merits. A good story and vibrant presentation? No, there's no story here at all. It might not have mattered, as Hot Pursuit didn't have one either, but wait. The game was called Most Wanted. Don't expect the same level of tuning either. Cars weren't something you won or purchased, you simply found them. There seemed to be plenty of activities on the open map, but the world still felt empty. Long story short, the 2012 Most Wanted is still regarded as the most unsuccessful attempt to cash in on the original title, and the score of 4.4 from players on Metacritic speaks for itself. There is no particular point in remembering the NFS Hot Pursuit clone represented by rivals, so let's move on to the new era of the series, the reboot that took place in 2015.
How will they remember you?
Personally, when I saw the trailer, I held my breath, hoping it would revitalize the series and return it to its roots. However, when the long-awaited release happened, my rose-colored glasses came off. Of course, the game looked good from a graphical standpoint, there is no questions about it, but in 2015 it was hard to impress anyone, especially in racing simulators. The action took place only at night, which I had no issues with, and I was initially excited about the first-person narrative featuring live actors, until those actors started speaking. Why were the characters from 2005 able to carry the story, while in 2015 they couldn't? Because in the new release, the characters were completely bland, their acting barely reached Razzie level, and they simply weren't interesting, no one wanted to listen to them.
I'm sorry, man.
As for the cars, the selection was solid, and the tuning options were decent, allowing customization for drifting or sprinting. Nonetheless, the handling of the cars left much to be desired, making it hard to enjoy drifting, which is essential in racing sim. Reading reviews from other players confirmed I wasn't alone in my concerns, especially regarding optimization and content quality. Eventually, updates began to roll out, with Legends adding familiar cars from older titles, including the iconic BMW M3 GTR, but it didn't significantly improve the situation. The final nail in the coffin was the mandatory online connection required to launch the game. Players could only reward this gift from EA with a score of 5 out of 10. It's truly disheartening to see a once great racing series struggle in recent years, and I realized the reboot wouldn't change anything. Oh, that cursed NFS Payback. On paper, the sequel was supposed to be a perfect follow-up. No required internet connection, a more developed open world that was even larger, a focus on the story, police chases, everything we love, right? In the end, we got all of that, but with a boring and repetitive gameplay loop that went unaddressed. On top of that, we were treated to very casual car handling and a forgettable narrative. It was the classic NFS package we've seen in recent years. The cherry on top was microtransaction system, which heavily impacted gameplay. If players didn't want to spend extra money, they had to grind monotonously for resources just to continue the story. Critics didn't rate the game well, and players were even harsher, giving it just 3.7 out of 10. After such a flop, I could only look at Heat with irony, especially since Electronic Arts marketed like crazy. After all, they always had money for marketing. I only decided to try the game when I got an EA Access subscription, and with maximum skepticism I launched it, only to find myself somewhat satisfied. You know that feeling when something doesn't spark wild excitement but isn't outright terrible? That's exactly what happened to me. EA just needed to ditch an awful microtransaction system and ignore the plot. Given how meaningless the story is, they probably did just that. They improved the tuning system in the best traditions of Most Wanted and added style reminiscence of the old Underground. To sum it up, the game is stylish. Everything, from the stunning visual tuning of cars to the seamless transitions, looks beautiful and harmonious. I genuinely respect Ghost Games, as they've been responsible for the NFS series for years. And it's almost sad, because all the blame for the publisher's idiotic decisions lands squarely on them. The car handling is slightly improved. Sure, most cars still drive like tanks, but it's progress. The first thing that really delighted me was the tuning system. It's genuinely good here. You can customize not just the car, but also your character's appearance, buying branded gear and dressing them head to toe. If you are more into cars, you can change headlights, wings, bumpers, roofs, tires, rims, radiators, everything, just like in the good old days. I was on the verge of shedding a sentimental tear, but then I drove around the city and realized it wasn't all that great. Some cars do handle better, that's a fact. Driving is at least enjoyable, sometimes, but enjoyable. The races lack variety, but it seems everyone has gotten used to that. As for the story, I'd rather stay quiet. In any case, players rated the project at 5.4 out of 10. Now we move on to the latest game in the series, Need for Speed Unbound. First, I will say that I haven't played enough of Unbound to provide a full review, meticulously analyzing every little detail. However, I've logged enough hours to state the following: it's the same Need for Speed you've come to expect in recent years. No revolution happened. Nonetheless, there are some new features. As for the physics, it remains untouched. The game is still built on Frostbite engine, so that's not surprising. I'm sure some players will notice differences in car behavior, but to me, they handle just the same. Now let's talk about the graphics. Remember the stunning visuals in the trailers? Forget about it. They're not present here. In this regard, the game closely resembles Heat. During the day, it feels like you are playing a mobile game. Such graphics are unacceptable in 2022, especially for a racing simulator. Only at night or on overcast days can the visual flaws be somewhat hidden, and from a distance, the graphics can even be somewhat attractive. However, the cartoonish effects can't be turned off, despite the developers promising otherwise. As for the soundtrack, it features a lot of hip-hop and pop artists. It may not appeal to everyone, so don't expect rock or rapcore in the spirit of Underground, but I found it enjoyable as background music. Also, a new secondary activity has been introduced, Racer SOS. You receive a call asking to rescue a street racer from the cops. You have about 10 minutes to reach the meeting spot, pick them up from the roadside, and get them to safety. As a reward, you will get a new hideout, so you won't have to travel far back to the main garage while trying escaping the cops, especially since there's no fast travel. If you need to change, buy or upgrade a car, you have to drive to the nearest available hideout. But wait, what's the point of the fast travel in a game focused on driving? And I found myself thinking that I wasn't enjoying driving here as much as I didn't enjoy it in Heat or NFS 2015. In the end, critics rated the game 77 out of 100, while players rated it 5.9 out of 10, which is only slightly higher than Heat. To conclude, we have one of the oldest and once respected racing simulators franchises, now in a deep crisis. The ratings shown are exclusively from players on Metacritic. From 98 to 2006, the scores were genuinely good, but in 2007, a turning point occurred when the ratings dropped to average levels. This trend continued until 2015, when they attempted a reboot. As you can see, the reboot has proven unsuccessful. As a longtime fan, I sincerely hope that the situation improves in the near future, because Need for Speed, which once brought millions of positive emotions and excitement, deserves more than the reboot of 2015, Payback or Unbound. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments which NFS game stole your heart.